Okay, here we are. Good morning. Here we are with our immigration spotlight. So good to see you ladies this morning. Today we have, Maureen's going to start us off with a prayer, but today we have Julie Taylor from National Farm Worker Ministry, and she's going to give us a preview of the materials they're presenting for the 6 weeks of Harvest of Justice that they do every fall. And she's going to fill us in on all that. And so great to see you, and hope a few more people pop along the way. Rebecca, you'll let them in when they show up, I'm assuming. Okay, Maureen.
Hey, good morning. Rox shared this prayer with me. God of land and earth and field and farm, we thank you for the gracious gifts of fruits and vegetables and nuts and grain. These give us health and energy and a wholesome life. Help us to remember the hard work of farm workers who bring us these gifts. May we show our gratitude as consumers and advocates and citizens by standing in solidarity with farm workers as they campaign for fair wages, decent living, and working conditions, and the path to citizenship. Give us voice and presence so our faith will have an impact for them in the public square. Because we all eat, because we are all human beings deserving of dignity, because we are created by you and loved by you, and necessary to each other for our health and well-being. We pray. Amen and blessed be.
Well, it'd be so. And that prayer actually came from the materials that Julie's going to be referencing this morning.
Thanks.
Okay, Julie, so good to see you.
It's good to see you. It's good to be back with this group. On several occasions before, we've had a chance to have conversation. You're the first group that's sort of hearing the resources that we have prepared on food justice for this fall harvest of justice season. So I'm trying them out with you, and appreciate the opportunity to do that. Also on the Zoom with us is Emily Miller. Emily did the lion's share of writing and putting together these resources for us. And just before, she's actually leaving National Farm Worker Ministry to start a new adventure. So today's her last day. It's kind of bittersweet for me, but I'm glad she's on the call. And she's the one that's made all these things look the way they look, helped to oversee the video that we're going to see in a few minutes. And she, along with a writer that we engaged earlier in the year, Mallory Serkleski, are responsible for helping us gather this. As always, there is way too much information. I always say I want to share a lot of things with you, and I run through things. I'm gonna do some of that today, but I hope we'll have a chance to talk a little bit along the way. I know this is the immigration spotlight. We're focusing on farm workers, which are 1.5 million of the people who pick our fruits and vegetables in this country. Over half of them are not documented. And so immigration is a big piece of this. We won't be talking about it so much specifically today, but the implications of immigration to food justice for farm workers is always an underpinning of what happens. And so anyway, the National Farm Worker Ministry, has been around for over 50 years. Mary Jean was there in the beginning and has stayed with us. But our mission is to educate, equip, and mobilize people of faith and conscience in the farm worker movement. And it's a commitment we've had for these 50 years, over those years, and it's a commitment we take into the future. This year, we're looking at farm workers and food justice. And so you have to start with food security. You have to start with the basics. And so just to look at a definition of food security, the USDA has a basic way to define it. It's access by all people at all times to enough food for an active, healthy life. And food insecurity is simply the opposite of that. The people who spend their days picking our fruits and vegetables struggle to feed their own families. In Rox's promotion of this event today, we talked about numerous studies across the United States that have documented staggering rates of hunger and food insecurity. There was a study in Georgia. Georgia actually has almost all H-2A visa workers that work in Georgia harvesting. But in the study of farm workers in Georgia, they found that 63% of the migrant and seasonal workers surveyed struggled to feed themselves and their families. They face countless barriers when trying to get food. Low wages is one of those. Poor or non-existent public transportation is one of those. A lack of culturally appropriate food is also a barrier for them. In about 91%, in a similar study, I think this one was done in North Carolina, about 91% of people, farm workers, obtained most of their food from superstores like Walmart, and the remaining 9% said they shopped at supermarkets like Food Line. We've heard that Dollar General is also a location where a lot of farm workers do have some access, but you can imagine what kind of access you have at a Dollar General. 87% said that they relied on someone else to drive them to the store. And so if they didn't have anyone, they didn't have that kind of access. Farm workers also reported turning to alternative food sources. So 18.5%, almost 20% relied on a church or a food pantry to help them have access to food. 18%, almost 20%, ate food grown in a household or a camp garden that they tried to keep up with while they were there. And 17.5% relied on food given them by their employers. One of the questions you have to ask is, does this food contribute to your health? So in the 4 pillars of food security, one of those is utilization. I'm not going through all of those, but one of them is utilization. It's just simply the biological part that food plays in the role of the human body so that we can take food and convert it into energy. Oxfam America has estimated that a farm worker burns in one day the same amount of calories as a marathon runner. For us, this is pretty incredible. And then when you consider that they don't necessarily have access to food, then it's not an interesting fact, it's embarrassing, right? Farm workers suffer from a variety of health-related conditions due to poor nutrition. Despite their work in the produce sector, 89% of farm workers consume fewer than 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. And 5 fruits and vegetables has been sort of a minimum standard for health for us for a long time. There were 2 studies in California and 1 in Michigan that demonstrated high rates of chronic health conditions related to poor nutrition. And so for farm workers. So high cholesterol, high blood pressure, particularly in men, 79% of males and 74% of females were either overweight or obese. 39% had diabetes, 23% had hypertension, 18% had anemia, and 20% had hypercholesterolemia. So these are troubling statistics for us, right? The overwhelming irony of this US food system is that the people that pick our fruits and vegetables in the agricultural industry are also 400 times more likely to experience food insecurity than the general public. They work long, arduous hours under the most punishing of conditions and are literally unable to enjoy their own fruits and labors. So we want to take a minute here and see a video that we created to kind of give an overview, but also hear the voices of farm workers and farm worker organizing leaders as they talk about food justice and the realities that farm workers have to face.
Okay, I'm working on it. Where did it go? Are we good?
It's kind of quiet to
Every single one of us depend on farm workers every single day. And yet most people never even think about it. Don't even know who farm workers are. It's completely out of their range of thought.
Sabe uno nunca cansado del trabajo, muy cansado de trabajar en el campo.
Llega uno cansadísimo y hacer de comerles a los hijos. Tiene uno que cocinar y trabajar y hacer todo a la vez.
Our food system is very extractive, and we tend to treat the soil, the workers, the animals that are part of that food production system as expendable, and they're, for that same reason, very exploited. And so food justice means that none of those parts of the food system are exploited, but that they are allowed to work in a safe and just environment.
Siempre se ha hecho una contradicción de que, o sea, supuestamente los trabajadores de agrícolas son los que tienen más acceso a la comida y es más difícil. Se la pasan trabajando y trabajando y pues no tienen tiempo para ir a agarrar su comida. Se les hace muy difícil el transporte a veces para encontrar comida fresca también. No cosechan, no recogen esos productos frescos.
Food justice is the idea that all the food that we consume, that everything that comes to our tables goes through a process where the people who procure our food are well taken care of, where the animals that provide that food are also well taken care of, where the trade agreements that bring that food to our tables are respectful of the people who produce that food and the workers who were involved in that food procurement, that all human rights are respected and that it doesn't displace any other people, that it respects all those involved, so that when it comes to our table, we can be sure that no humans, animals, or plants were unnecessarily harmed in the production of that food.
Tener auto es una desventaja porque a veces no, pues no tenemos quien nos lleve, a veces nos dicen no, que en tal hora puedo, a veces pueden, a veces no. Y a veces si no pueden, tenemos que buscar a otra persona que nos lleva. Tenemos que pagar el raite también. Tenemos que comprar todo para que uno ya no salga más, porque imagínense andar pagando también raite cada salida, a veces. No, pues no. La lenteja no lo come usted. Yo soy diabética, digo, y tengo que tener cuidado también al cocinar porque si no, me rebajo un dedo. Porque pues a veces así lo comíamos así, porque como no había para salchicha ni para nada, ni para otra cosa, lo comíamos nada más así solito. Nada de su esposa allá en la...
If the only food that is accessible to you is food that is highly processed, that has been robbed of its nutritional value, you're more likely to develop some long-term conditions. And at least here in Florida, the issues that we have seen among workers is a predisposition to diabetes, high, a lot of them already come with high glucose levels. They have high blood pressure, they are dehydrated, and just, the accumulation of all those health factors just puts them at a greater risk.
A través de esto también hay mucha convivencia entre la comunidad porque todos colaboran y se hace un grupo grande para ayudar a repartir la comida y es bueno.
Yo soy campesina de nacimiento. Crecimos piscando fresa, piscando maíz, chile, jitomate, todo lo que se daba en el campo, nosotros lo hacíamos desde pequeñas. El ahora, por ejemplo, cuando la gente viene y me dice, mira, sabes que no tengo, pero nada en el refrigerador y que la organización puede ayudarle con eso, y la gente se va tan agradecida que, wow, realmente es una bendición para nosotros poder tener ese papel dentro de la comunidad y dentro de la organización.
Yo me gusta hacer enchiladas o tamales, porque yo soy de San Luis. Ay, no, pues a veces pues no lo hago porque no me alcanza el tiempo. Y a veces corre uno para comprar comida más rápida, que pues no viene siendo tan buena, que porque para comer, qué rápido, pues que una pizza, pues eso no es nutritivo para los niños ni para uno tampoco.
Que tengan buen día.
Gracias. Igualmente, gracias.
Como donde yo vivo me agarra como a 35 minutos para ir a Walmart. Y a veces por aquí no encuentra uno lo que busca para cocinar algo fresco.
La comida no es algo que la gente se tiene, en mi opinión, que ganar. La comida se le debería de dar a todo ser humano. Es el derecho de existir. Y que alguien lo manipule para obtener un beneficio propio o para crear esas diferencias sociales, a mí de verdad que me parece desastroso, por no decir otras palabras.
Food sovereignty means giving control back to the people. Give control back to the communities, absolutely. And they come here with knowledge, and sometimes indigenous and ancestral knowledge.
Also, part of food sovereignty is that what you're growing is something that is important to you, that is part of your cultural tradition, that is the food that you know from home, from when you were growing up, and not something that was processed and then boxed and canned or put through a grinder and baked over easy for you. But it means something that means something to you, to your family history, something that you smell and it reminds you of home.
I think right now. Ay, perdón, mami. Perdón, mami.
Te digo, Ana, que quisiera hacer jirafa ahorita.
Para alcanzar las de
Para
arriba.
alcanzar las de arriba, están
Lo bueno
hermosas.
que estas son bien flexibles las,
Sí,
las
sí,
matitas.
está bien, son bien nerviosas, bien. Se rompen como un poquito.
¿Esto hará daño?
No, no hace daño, pero es para quitarle más la resina.
Ya, es una planta del sureste de México. Se acostumbra allá por Veracruz, toda la que era península
Por
de México.
Tabasco,
Yucatán.
Ya, sí.
Es la espinaca de árbol, le dicen a alguna gente. Te la llevas para que la siembres. Llévatela para que la siembres. ¿Sí?
Ay, sí, cierto, me la llevo. Mira, vamos a
Lo
deshojarla.
hizo el propósito.
Ay, sí,
Pues
no,
no, la llevo. Pero esa así nace, así.
Sí, ponemos en tamalitos. Ponemos a poner hervir el agua y la sumergimos la hoja y la apagas. La dejas, la sacas hasta que el agua ya está fría, la exprimes bien y se pica, bien picadita. Y ya se le revuelve pues a la masa para hacer los tamalitos. Le puedes poner un poquito de frijoles chiquito y le puedes poner la mantequita y ya los envuelves y salen muy ricos.
Ya que la encontré, la sigo cocinando con huevo. Le digo, y es muy nutritiva. Y aparte de eso, te ayuda con la diabetes, limpieza de riñones, todo eso. Son muchas propiedades que tiene.
De verdad que me gustaría venir a hacer un día para que ustedes lo probaran.
Ah, sí. Sería buenísimo porque
agua?
aquí nos enseña.
No, los tamalitos.
Oh, ¿de verdad?
Los tamalitos. Sí, para que ustedes lo prueben.
Nomás díganos qué sábado puede y nos organizamos para
hace años que no hacemos, deje practicar.
Muy bueno porque pues deja uno de extrañar la comida de allá. La deja uno de extrañar.
Un sábado que vengamos voy a traer huevito con salsa.
Ah, perfecto. Ya.
Ya voy a decir.
Entonces le quito esto.
Esto sí nada más, esto, mira, porque aquí está mucha la resinita.
¿Esto hará daño?
No hace daño, pero es para quitarle más la resina. Mire, lo que pasa es que hay dos tipos, hay una que Ana comentaba que tiene mucha pelusa y que esa sí se da como el sobaco, le decimos nosotros. Pero esa resina no es mala.
No, dice que no.
So one of my favorite parts of this was interesting when we were first working on this video and it started sort of quiet, but the background sounds that you can hear, and I invite you to go watch it through our website, but the sounds of nature behind, and then at the end, the sounds of the women continuing to talk as they work together on the spinach tree. They're some of my favorite parts. Maybe we'll take just a minute to talk about folks' reactions to the video. Are there questions you have or observations you made that you want to maybe articulate with the rest of us?
Anybody? You can just go ahead and unmute yourself.
I guess this is goes without saying, but I volunteer at a migrant food bank. And I feel like the choices that they have are not what I would want to eat. And I always feel like they should just be paid enough so they can go to the store and buy what they want to eat, you know, and what you say is so true about not having transportation. You know, they don't have a car, or for long periods of time, the past couple of years, they were afraid to drive because immigration enforcement had stepped up so much. So those were just some observation I had.
Sure. Yeah, and you see the one woman who talked about having to pay for it and pay every time you go out, you know, so if you have low wages to start with, that, you know, can become an impossibility, right? So I'll keep going. to say a few things for us. Food justice is a holistic and structural view of this food system. So it looks at healthy food as a human right and seeks to address the structural barriers to that right. The group that you saw in the video that we're talking together, those are farm worker organizers from the Farm Worker Association in Florida that are based in Apopka. And they were actually sitting outside at a place where they have a community garden. And there were folks from the community who came, but there are folks that are part of the farm worker community there. It's a good model for being able to grow indigenous food, but also being able to grow food that they have access to. But at the same time, it's also a good model for educating the wider public about these issues. And then the community garden creates relationships for farm workers and then for advocates or people from the community to sit together, learn together, share together. I'm interested in having one of those tamales from the spinach tree, or even the eggs. I'm trying to figure that out, but anyway. So Reina Lopez, the leader of the Piccoon Union that is based in Oregon, she's suggesting that we need to ask these questions as consumers. Where did my food come from? And how are the people treated that were picking these fruits and vegetables? That is food justice for her. And it takes us into a discussion too about a lot of us, if we've worked with food pantries, food banks, and we've looked at hunger in the US, I think Feeding America has a great map. We refer to it in some of our materials, but a map of food banks and pantries around the country. But it's clear that there are places that we've come to call food deserts. So areas that have poor access to healthy food. I mean, if all of your groceries come from a Dollar General or a CVS or a Walgreens, like a drugstore kind of, or a convenience store rather than a grocery store, or even some grocery stores. I know I was in Alabama some last month, and the local Piggly Wiggly in Alabama did not have nearly the variety of food choices that I was used to at the Food Lion here in Raleigh. And so when you think about what access people have to it and how far they have to drive for it, and the whole issue around organic and whether those, I didn't see the word organic in the Piggly Wiggly at all, which is, I'm not dishing them, but I'm just saying, choices are different that way. Mm-hmm. The typical food desert maps highlight the locations of grocery stores and transit lines, and the initiatives that come out of those projects might include increasing transit access or adding pop-up markets or food produce vans or that kind of thing in a food desert. So what we heard from a lot of advocates was that it's really not food deserts, it's food apartheid, because there's some intentionality in how communities are treated and where businesses choose to locate that connect to race and economic disadvantage that really keep people in those places. So food apartheid looks at the whole food system and takes into account income, race, geography, and it encompasses the social and racial inequalities that are at play in our food system. So it goes, deeper than just this is a food desert as though it happened by accident, to the intentionality of some of that. The fight to end food apartheid is community driven, and efforts come from local cries to redistribute the power and dismantle the oppressive political and economic structures that disempower specifically communities of color. And that's what our farm workers are. So what does food justice look like for farm workers? Justice, this is from Jeannie Economos. She was one of the speakers from the Farm Worker Association that was sitting in the circle of folks on the video you just saw. But Jeannie reminds us that justice is not just about wages. It's not just about working conditions. It really means giving control to the people, giving a voice to the people, listening to them, and not just listening to them. They need to be part of the decision making, right? We've said a long time, we've talked about bringing farm workers to the table, that decisions, and there's a whole movement, not just about us, but not without us. You know, how do you make decisions for individuals? Leah Cohen, who's the director of the Agricultural Food Justice Project, says this: typically when you're talking about justice, there's a few who are advantaged in whatever system you're talking about, and there are many who are disadvantaged by that system. So justice is about changing those systemic factors that create that kind of disparity. It's a staggering statistic that the people who feed us are less likely to be able to feed themselves. Those systems create the insecurity and those disparities with regard to food insecurity. And so food justice is about eliminating those disparities. So we could go quite in depth talking about food sovereignty and the system. But I'm gonna move us through some of this a little bit quickly. So the food sovereignty itself is the right of people to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and their rights to define their own food and agricultural systems. You saw Neza from the Farm Worker Association addressing this in the video. Food sovereignty means solidarity, not competition, and building a fairer world from the bottom up. And food is also political. The production of it, the access to it, and the distribution of food are essential for our society to function, and control of our food system confers power. So let's talk about some sort of food justice, self-directed solutions. So we already know farm workers in some places in this country have unions or organizing, and this is where they are organizing themselves. And this is part of what we have always supported. We've always stood in solidarity with farm workers in their organizing efforts. Worker rights are human rights. It's important for us to stand with them. But they have also created, had to create some sort of innovative ways that they can, in some cases, work around the system. I live in North Carolina, which is a right to work state. Very difficult to create or maintain a union in my state and a lot of the states in the South. So food justice for farm worker organizing groups in some places looks like food certification programs. And I've come to talk to you about those before, but I'm just gonna mention them quickly again. The National Farm Worker Ministry currently, and we've got a video about this on our website. I invite you to go visit it. I won't take the time to show it right now, but it features these 4 food certification programs. 3 of them have food labels. And so as consumers, we can look for those labels. And if we don't see them, we can ask for a store manager and ask them to have those products. But each organization is independent of National Farm Worker Ministry, and they're independent of each other, but all serve a similar purpose: to bring together growers, farm workers, packers, distributors, retailers, and consumers to transform agriculture at various levels and improve the lives and working conditions of farm workers. So the Food Justice Certified label of the Agricultural Justice Project is one of those. This project primarily works in the US and Canada to provide certification and technical assistance tools to transform the food system. Several of the farm worker partners that we work with support this food certification program: Familias Unidas in Washington State, CATA in New Jersey, and the Farm Worker Association in Florida. Another one that we have been part of supporting over its creation and ongoing operations is the Equitable Food Initiative. A number of our farm worker partners are on the board of this and helped to create this. The United Farm Workers Union in California, the Farm Labor Organizing Committee in Ohio, the Coon in Oregon have all been part of and continue to be voices on the board of the Equitable Food Initiative. It focuses on worker involvement and active collaboration among all the stakeholders, major food buyers, growers, farm worker groups, and consumer advocates. They really deal a lot with food retailers and food safety issues. The other is also one that we've supported for a long time. Many of you are familiar with the Coalition of Immokalee Workers Fair Food Program. And this is a worker-driven, socially responsible model overseen by the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. The training of this program is done by the coalition members with both supervisors and workers on farms, and they have an excellent record of addressing longstanding abuses. And then I was here earlier this year or last year, I guess, to talk about the Milk with Dignity program. This is sponsored by Migrant Justice, primarily based in Vermont. They don't have a label, and there's some intentionality about that, but they are modeled after the Fair Food Program. So work in a similar way, specifically in the dairy industry in relation to milk products. So they're a relatively new campaign, but we are in support of them. There are also like models of self-directed food justice programs that farm worker partners have either created. The first two here, farm workers have created, and then the other sort of exists in the wider society. So that's our community garden program. I described a little bit about the Farm Worker Association, but there is a case study from Kata about their community garden program in New Jersey on our website, and I invite you to read that. Familias Unidas in Washington State actually operates a food cooperative. They, but with the support of community to community, they own a piece of property where they actually harvest and sell their own berries in the community. They're not nearly big enough to really be in competition with the largest berry company, but they're finding that it's a good way for them to have control of what happens, their working conditions, how much they get paid, and all of that. So they literally own the land and are farming in our country on that land. A wider community food justice program is community supported agriculture. A lot of those are smaller farms. They don't necessarily use farm workers as such, but I know farm workers who work with them. And this is a way to connect more closely, like farm to table, the food that you eat. So in places like where I live in Raleigh, the local Baptist church across the street from where our office is working with a small farm in the area. And so once a month, or once every 2 weeks during the height of the harvest season, products are brought to the church. People pay for a share of those, and then they take home whatever they're raising at that time. So it can be produce, it can be, sometimes they'll do eggs and that kind of thing. And they have herbs and occasionally flowers. So it's a way to more closely connect what happens on the farm to what actually goes on our table and comes in our homes. So other ways that the community can support farm workers, we show up for farm workers and support their campaigns. And we talk about those kinds of things on an ongoing basis. We're continuing to boycott Wendy's with the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. We're involved in a boycott of e-cigarettes with the Farm Labor Organizing Committee. Also because, and I talked about this just a moment at the beginning of this, but farm workers are closest to the ground. Literally what happens to them happens in the field. That is related to what can we do systemically around legislation. There's a lot of debate right now about comprehensive immigration reform. What does that look like? There's at least 4 options that farm workers are considering. We want to support a pathway to citizenship or immigration status for all of the farm workers and their families that are in our country and currently undocumented. And we want to end the fear that keeps farm workers from challenging unfair and abusive labor practices. So some movement has taken place in the budget process. And so they're in budget reconciliation now in Congress. Some legislation has been introduced to Congress. Not much has gotten very far. So we hope to be talking a bit more about specific ways that you can support particular legislation in the next few months. In addition, there was introduced this Asuncia and Valdivia Heat Illness and Fatality Prevention Act, which just makes sure that OSHA creates federal guidelines across the country for farm workers to have access to water, rest, and shade, and other protective measures. We've heard about the death of farm workers from heat stress, and it shouldn't happen. And so we're pushing this. I don't see any movement on it at this time, but I will say that I'm part of a group related to Public Citizen that has continued to push things out. And we recently signed on to a letter that they sent with a number of other advocates to ask for emergency guidelines because of the temperatures, especially this summer that we've seen so far, emergency guidelines to help with this as we work towards getting this legislation passed. It's always a challenge, right? So other community solutions, and you'll see there's more about this on our website, but we know that people can connect to gleaning opportunities in different parts of the country where you literally go out and pick the leftover fruits and vegetables at farms. And then that is taken to food banks and soup kitchens and food pantries. It helps to provide low-income people, some of whom are farm workers, with fresh fruits and vegetables. And so gleaning is a good option. Food banks, food pantries, volunteering, and you spoke about that earlier, volunteering and participating in that, and in food drives to help provide food for those outlets. And in some cases, I think to use our sensitivity as people who are concerned about food sovereignty, what are more culturally appropriate foods that we can give to food banks and food pantries? If we just take time to inquire what people are utilizing there, what kind of people are coming there, then we can think in terms of, are there things that we can pay for in the grocery store and contribute? Some of our grocery stores have areas devoted to ethnic foods. And so just utilize those to share with the folks that might be in our community. When you shop and eat, remember farm workers. And I'm just going to share a couple of practical graphics. This one was prepared by Kate Hammond, who used to work for us, but just so that you can sort of see food is produced, goes through processing, distribution, and that sort of thing. The less of the process that it has to go through, the less of the efforts to can it or prepare it to serve or that sort of thing, the better off we are. But this is just sort of a picture of that process. And this is what food sovereignty is all about, is all of those spaces that are in between when it gets to you and where it comes from. That's what food sovereignty is about, addressing those different places. If we want to benefit farm workers the most, this graphic was created by one of our Duke interns, Damien. So farm workers actually get more money from fresh fruits and vegetables that you purchase and use at home than they get from picking for a company that will then can it or sell it to a restaurant or that sort of thing. They just make more money for, on average, for what we use as directly as possible from the harvest. So I think that's an important thing for us to remember as we're shopping, even though I like for somebody else to not only prepare it, but do the dishes. We make concessions, don't we? So I have shared lots of stuff with you, but I want to stop now. That's a lot of content. And I just will say I had about twice as much, and I cut it down last night so that we'd have a chance to, have questions or share insights or ideas and thoughts or.
Julie,
Yeah.
thank you so much. Would you stop sharing your screen so we can see our little faces?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make a couple comments. I'm only a few years into working with National Farm Worker Ministry, and I'm so taken by, I don't have this huge history of Carolyn and Mary Jean, but as she mentioned, all these different organizations around the country, and how they're getting the farm worker partners are getting worker involvement in this decision making, and how really important that is, and how different each one of those groups might be approaching a situation. And sometimes the different groups don't totally agree on things, but we're there as National Farm Worker Ministry in Loretto to support what their decision making is. And she mentioned the small group in Washington that have their own land and are raising berries. And I had a chance to be there with a board meeting a few years ago. And one of the I think it was 3 guys initially that kind of founded this. And he took us out into the blueberries, and which I'd never seen blueberries growing. I live in Wyoming. And he took us out and he showed us how to pick a blueberry without leaving fingerprints on it. And how it was an art, it was a skill for him. These are not unskilled workers. And then after he filled his hand with blueberries and showed them to me with this giant grin on his face, and this was their land and this was their blueberry. These were their blueberries. That was just, yeah, kind of a moment for me that I wanted to share. So Julia, and she's just touched on this 6 weeks we have 6 weeks of information that I'm going to be sharing with the community, and goes into all these topics at depth. So you're going to see lots of ways to pray and be involved as the weeks go on, because we do like an action piece, right, Mary Jean?
Right.
We like an action piece. Okay, I'll stop talking.
Yeah, I just want to say I really liked the last graphic you showed, with that shows McDonald's or whatever, the hamburger, and that. I think that will touch folks. That'd be a great card, I think.
Okay.
And another thing is to get what people need to look for, the certified, and people can never see enough of that. I mean, I couldn't wait as you were showing it, because I did not see what we have in California, but I know just because of the food equity program. And but I don't think if there was a way to show what's happening in Denver. I'm thinking of Loretto right now. What should they look for in Denver?
Mm-hmm.
And what should people in St. Louis, in Kentucky, well, we have people all over, but
Right.
Ohio, yeah, that touches on that. And New York, because people will look for that. I mean, the audience that are going to be looking at this will look, but they want to know their own place. That's one thing. And I want a spinach plant in my yard.
Yeah.
And I'll try it with the eggs. I think I can figure it out. Oh my God, I might not like it. So
You might love it.
I might.
Yeah. Well, let me speak to a couple things you said. One is, thank you for saying that about Damon's graphic. For years we had this graphic that was $1 that you split up into 3 parts, and this really small part went to the farm worker another, a little bit larger, but another small part went to the farmer. And then this big part went to the agribusiness system. And it, at the time that it was created, it was actually based on statistics and things of that time. We actually found the person who introduced that a long time ago. The problem is, over the years, the agribusiness system and the USDA, who you kind of entrust with counting things, right, keeping up with those things, has changed the way it counts. So you can't go back to the exact same information. Damon spent probably a month and a half doing a lot of other things in our office, but searching for how do we give a similar kind of graphic that is contemporary? And this was what he came up with. That what he could look at told him this. And I said, well, this is also important. So we're kind of, it's been there, we've had it for a while, but we're really kind of debuting his graphic in these this year with this material. The other thing I wanted to share with you is that if you, on our resources, and Emily may choose to say something about this because she's been so involved with it, she knows where everything is. But on our website, when you go to this year's materials on food justice, and you go to the session that's titled Food Certification, she just put a link up in the chat. There is literally she created, it's almost like a business card size downloadable that you can give out that has the labels that we're supporting on it. So if you wanted to say to people, look for these labels in your local, or ask for, that's probably more appropriate, ask for these labels in your local grocery store, you could do that. And the second video that we created this year for the food justice theme, the one that you saw is sort of the overview of it, but there's one that's specifically dedicated to food certification programs. I want to say it's 10, 12 minutes, but it introduces each of these in the whole concept. So you have access, both of those videos are free. I mean, they're available on our website, so you can use that to convey to other people. The third thing I wanted to say is I wish we could create a map. And honestly, I think National Farm Worker Ministry is the entity to do that, because we relate to all the farm worker partners, and Rox was very helpful in just sharing. There are different ways to organize, and sometimes I think all the farm workers want to be in solidarity, but they think they should think that what they're doing is the right way to do it, but it's not necessarily the way somebody else does it. So there's the fact that we belong to all of them, that we are in relationship with all of them, means that we can say, here's 4 food certification programs, because they might not tell you that, right? They probably would agree that they're out there, but we can literally promote all of them. And so I think we're the entity to say, yeah, here in Denver, here's what you can do. The ongoing challenge of food certification is that it's a slow grow process. And so where you're more likely to see fair food labels in tomatoes, mostly on the East Coast, but they're trying to expand, but mostly on the East Coast. And you're more likely to see Equitable Food Initiative on the West Coast, right? Mm-hmm. And honestly, we used to do what did you call it? Like a wallet sized, here's what you should look for, these union labels and that sort of thing. There's fewer of those because companies are bigger, and the distribution is not necessarily with the whole company. And so it's at different places. It's hard to say you can support this, and this. It's just challenging. We haven't, Mary Jean, I wish we could figure it out, because I know people, we were looking at, we could find a map for food banks. We could find a map for, pantries. We couldn't find a map for migrant ministries across the country because there's not an entity collecting that, but I wish we could. But it's labor intensive. and then keeping up with those is also a little bit challenging, but it's something we want to do. What Emily came up with was this, like I said, this piece that you can download, and then, you know, you can print it on those, what the business card tear aparts, and that you could, if you're in person, you could actually share it with people. If you're doing online sharing, use the video to share the 4 different food certification programs. But I think for us, the push now is not just look for them so you can buy them, but ask for them. I think we're going to have to say to consumers in Denver, I don't know that there's any labels where you are, so take this in and ask them to look for those. You know what I mean? Like, I think our role as consumers is to increase the demand for those products. But it's going to take a long time because, you know, I mean, we're doing a lot, but we're still, you know, farm workers, we've marginalized farm workers, we've marginalized essential workers. We've just got to be louder. I don't know. We're working on that too, but thank you for asking.
Emily. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to your question, Mary Jean, about shopping regionally. If you think back to that other graphic that Julie showed about the food distribution chain, right? One of the issues that is endemic to the systemic inequities of the food agricultural system today is that now companies have vertically integrated to the extent that they now own almost every aspect of that pathway, right? So that's why I can go to a grocery store here in New York and see basically the same products that I would see in Denver, that I would see in Los Angeles, with the same labels, a lot of the same farms, a lot of the same, and they own that whole process. So that's why we also recommend that if you can, in addition to looking for those labels, that you kind of, if you can, shop outside of that system by going to CSAs, using CSAs, going to farmers markets. I mean, you get a better understanding of what their labor practices are as well, but then you also kind of subvert your participation in that system that has that inequity baked into its very design.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
Yep. Anybody else? As we wind down to the top of the hour. Carolyn.
Hi.
Hi, good to see you. World
Good
traveler.
to see you, Julie. Good to see everybody.
Good to see you.
Wonderful presentation. Thank you. And I know the Equitable Food Initiative, they were saying that Costco was the place to get some of their products, particularly the strawberries. Yeah.
Yes.
Here in
Yes.
California. So
Right.
Costco kind of had a good star next to their name.
Mhm.
And I also just want to say, I'm trying my best, and I could, apologize for the next 24 hours, but I won't. Trying to get involved with the farm workers down the road here in Half Moon Bay. There's an organization that has sprung up within the last year due to COVID and housing and all sorts of issues. And right now they're having a bicycle drive because, like you said, the whole transportation issue is a problem for farm workers everywhere. They don't have cars, they don't have the means to go anywhere. And I just think, living here in the Bay Area is such a rich, cultural, beautiful area, but you might be living here and never get to see any of these places because you don't have access. And I know, from years of taking kids on field trips in school, when we had, have parent chaperones, they would be the ones that were thrilled to get to go to these places. So I think, just some of the different ways like that we can enrich the lives of people. And I will try my best to get more involved in particularly this bicycle drive that's going on right now. But they also want people to bring lunch to farm workers on Fridays. So that's one of the little projects that we're also trying to get involved with.
Okay. Great. I think folks are responding in a lot of different ways in a lot of places. You know, National Farm Worker Ministry literally 50 years ago made the decision to shift our focus to advocacy and systemic change. But at the same time, recognizing that emergency food relief, emergency shelter, you know, I watched the sort of the hurricane reports that are going up through New Jersey and New York. And so we're seeing mostly what's happening in cities, but I'm wondering what's happening for farm workers, because, you know, New Jersey is the garden state. It grows a lot of produce. And it feeds a lot of produce into New York, and New York State, except for New York City, is an agricultural state. So there's an impact for whenever these kinds, I mean, we learned that from the farm workers in the environment study last year, that the fires, the floods, all of that kind of stuff. You know, we sort of worry a little bit, well, are we going to have a shortage in the grocery store or whatever, but the livelihoods of people disappear overnight in these things, and they're in the path of things sometimes because they're not warned, or all the warnings are in English, and they don't know where to go, and they have a lot of fears about travel during that time. So, but I think Emily and I talked about this a lot. You know, we want farm workers to have the same rights as every other worker. We want them to get reasonable wages that are livable, that they can, so they don't have to depend on other sources. But until then, you know, then you're sort of living in the middle of trying to be an advocate and also doing exactly what you're doing, Carolyn, collecting bicycles and serving lunch on Fridays. You have to, because your heart says they need us right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. It's always a treat to have you on.
I love coming here. So.
And everybody's going to be getting lots of information over the next 6 weeks, and you can plow through it and see where you can fit in and where you can act. We do like that part, where you can act. Okay, thank you, Julie.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And I think we have a spotlight scheduled for the 17th, and I believe we're working on Haiti. Information coming out of Haiti. So hope to see you in a couple weeks.
And we have Barbara Wander too coming on then. So, okay. Thank you all.
Have a great long weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye.